Well, hello, and welcome to the Natural Nation Network. This is Oscar Hines. I am absolutely thrilled and excited. The last program was amazing conversation. They were talking erase race, and we are going to continue this conversation. I have with me Mill this morning. Mill, how are you, my brother?
Good morning. I'm happy to be here today, Oscar. Ready to continue the conversation and see where it goes.
Man, well, you know, this is the Natural Nation Network, right?
Absolutely.
And we talk about health, we talk about wellness, but you know, one of the things that I like to mix it up about is the wellness of our nation. And we have turned the corner on some very interesting things. I mean, if you look at what's happened, if let's say we projected back 8-9 months ago,
sure,
and we were steeped in this belief that the current administration was deleterious to the African American community, and there was a struggle because that administration, number 45, believed that he had to start picking up some votes in Black communities.
Absolutely.
So he was stepping it up. Now, the argument can be made that more Black people were working during his administration than previously. The argument can be made that they repealed certain regulatory issues that eased some of the prison sentences and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
So some things were happening under the Republican administration that weren't happening under the Democratic administration.
Absolutely.
So that was the conversation. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, you know, Oscar, I believe each administration has its own challenges. I would say where our country was 8 years ago, 12 years ago wasn't where we were 4 years ago. So I believe when the previous administration came in office, they stepped into an office that had a different set of challenges than the previous administration that was led by the Obama administration. So I believe when President Trump came in office, he had more level ground with the economy and was able to tackle some of those issues which you spoke on head on, as opposed to maybe where we were 8 years prior to that, and even 12 to 16 years before that. So I think each administration has its own things they have to tackle. You look at this current administration with Joe Biden coming in, the first thing at the top of the list is vaccination for coronavirus and COVID-19. That was something that we never thought we would hear back in 2017. So as mentioned, each administration has its own challenges, and this is where we are now. So
because you bring out a really good point. So let's go back in time, and listeners, you will remember this, I hope. Let's go back in time to the Obama administration for just a moment. When President Obama took office, he was succeeding George W. Bush.
Absolutely.
We had just been through a war that we were still embroiled in. Two wars. The country was reeling and trying to recover from 9/11, which took place in 2001.
Absolutely.
And we had an economy because of 9/11 that had been decimated by inactivity, by insecurity. People were afraid to spend money.
Absolutely.
So Obama came in and he did what he thought would make the most sense. He did a bailout for some of the big corporations.
Correct.
Now, these were the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mae, Mac companies. They were all in. So when all of that happened, essentially the United States government bailed out some of the biggest and most powerful corporations on the planet.
Absolutely.
They handed them a ton of money. Now, do you recall what happened after that?
Well, let's see if I can jog my memory back. I do recall that moment when President Obama stepped into office and there was a big bailout that occurred. As you mentioned, the Fannie Mae's and the Sallie Mae's and the banking industry basically benefited from that. What I will say, as far as what I remember from that, I do remember it being a very uncertain time for the country. I recall not only the fiscal collapse in the areas in which you spoke of, the mortgage industry had taken it down, and a lot of people were losing their homes. Absolutely. And as you mentioned, that also led to job loss.
Exactly.
And once that unemployment started climbing to the levels in which it climbed, in those first couple of years or so, the country was in an uncertain territory.
But here's the part that's a little frustrating to me.
Go ahead.
And this is the thing that gets me. So you have all of these major corporations,
sure.
And we're talking about some of the AGF, the insurance company, Sachs, Goldman, all these different major companies. They essentially knew that they were giving mortgages to people that were really subprime paper.
Exactly.
And so they were giving prime loans in a subprime market to people that they knew could not afford to pay it back.
Absolutely.
And what they essentially said was, yeah, but the United States government guarantees this like a FDIC insurance type basis.
Sure.
So we don't have to worry about it because we can overextend ourselves. And when these loans default, we're going to basically be able to just file an insurance claim and get our money back.
Exactly.
And we've already made gobs of interest on these jokers.
Exactly.
And we get to repossess the properties that they're going to lose, and we're going to sell them again in a bull market.
Exactly.
So that's some bullshit.
Exactly.
And my question is, what was that about? Because when they got all of that money and they were able to take that money, they didn't reinvest it with the trickle-down theory concept that Reagan promulgated back in his day. They took that money and they paid themselves some big fat cap bonuses.
You said it, Oscar. You said it, and I'm not going to deny that. But the way in which you so eloquently put it just a moment ago, I think is exactly what they had in mind. There was a means to an end. There was an out for them, and the American people probably were in the dark a little bit to that. All they saw was a country that had just been involved in the biggest terrorist attack on our soil in 2001. Right. We saw Congress go back and forth regarding war and weapons of mass destruction, and for what I believe was a battle over oil and territory, which started back, if memory serves me correct, back to President H.W. Bush's tenure, back to the original Iraq War. But Kuwait, exactly. So I think what that was an opportunity to not only do exactly what you said, but kind of calm America's fears of where the country was going. So it's like, if we're going into war and 2 wars, and also people don't have a place to stay, and jobs are being lost, then the president won't get reelected. I think all of this was an attempt to calm the fears of the general public for once the election came around. President Bush was able to get his second term, and unfortunately, in that second term, things kind of snowballed.
Went south.
It went south,
especially when Florida was the one that decided the election. See, people have short memories, and they shouldn't. Let's take a quick break so we can get back on the clock here. And I'm speaking with Mill, mixing it up with my man here about the state of the nation here on the Natural Nation Network. You're tuned into Edge Radio TV. Be sure to share and connect. We'll be back in just a moment. The Natural Nation Network is really about taking control of your health physically, spiritually, emotionally, even intellectually, because there's so much out there in misinformation. There's a lot of people now that are suffering from all sorts of diseases that they really wouldn't have to suffer for if they had better information. And that's what we're here to do. Provide information that can save lives.
The mind and the body are totally connected.
Health can be really serious, and sometimes we just have to lighten it up a little bit while we're still providing substantive information. And you know, my sort of mantra on the salsa dance floor is kind of similar. You know, I tell somebody, if you make a mistake twice, it becomes a move. Okay.
Tune into Natural Nation every Tuesday at 11 a.m.
And we are back. This is the Natural Nation Network here on Edge Radio TV. I am joined by my man Mill today. Mill, we were just talking before the break about the state of affairs right during the Obama's administration.
Absolutely.
And when he assumed power, so to speak. But there was a gigantic bailout. I think the only GM took a bailout. I believe that Chrysler took a bailout. I think Ford was the only car dealership that didn't take the bailout. They didn't need it. Mm-hmm. And there was also a major shift in the economy when all of the Lehman Brothers and all these different financial organizations essentially just came to the federal government and said, you know, we're Goldman Sachs. If we go under, it's going to have the domino effect.
Exactly.
And the entire economy is going to go to hell in a handbasket.
Exactly.
Is that what you guys want? And they put them under pressure. It was literally like, we're going to go into the worst depression. Not we're speeding past recession. We're going to go to the greatest depression in the history of the United States. We're going to surpass 1929 because now our economy is global, and it's going to create a global
collapse,
recession, depression, and it's going to have a domino effect because the dollar is the standard, right?
Absolutely.
So what could you do if you're a new president that's trying not to piss off everybody and see the collapse of the greatest economy in the world?
So it sounds like you're telling me his hand was forced,
yeah?
President Obama. Yeah, because that's exactly what I could recall from that moment as well. I could remember him coming on stage with, to the podium with not such an optimistic look on his face when having to do it, but it was something that just had to be done because of those factors in which you mentioned. You know, one thing that I always wondered was why do so many people across the world, a lot of people speak English. And of course, we're not the first country that speaks English, but I was wondering why a lot of the world kind of always danced to our beat, per se. And I think that was a moment to rectify or show exactly why. It's because what is at stake in the economy or fiscally for the world depends largely on what's happening here with us stateside. And I think that put it into perspective more so than I'd ever saw in my lifetime to that point. So he had to make that move in order to not only keep our country flowing, but keep the rest of the world afloat.
So I'm not sure how much you've delved into some of the the world banks and where the world banks are based. There's a whole conversation around that, but the treasury of the world is based in London, England.
Wow.
And there's an Anglo-American connection that the Americans and the English decided they are joined at the hip. The Tea Party was a minor inconvenience because the incestuous relationship that took place after that was immeasurable. And it still goes on. Now, why do I call it a little incestuous? Well, damn it, let's get in. Let's get in because it's something that listeners have to know. So there was a systematic process under which the institution of slavery built that wealth.
Okay.
That wealth was not just serendipitous, or it wasn't just based on the fact that you had some brilliant strategists that called themselves industrialists back in the 1800s. No, this was predicated on a group of individuals that systematically took another group of people and used their labor and transported them all over the world to build their wealth, to cultivate the natural resources all over the planet. And so as you go to places in Africa and India and all the different conquests, and you start cultivating natural resources and then bringing it in to a manufacturing center in a European-based economy, now all of a sudden you are extracting billions and billions of dollars and collecting global wealth. And once you collect that global wealth, now you have the capacity to control policy. And when you're controlling policy, you can perpetuate whatever the hell you want to perpetuate.
You can. And in the state, going back to slavery, not only are you creating global wealth, you have a pretty good contract because your contractors are not asking or are getting paid much to anything at all. So it's a win-win for you, and it is one of the that move, everything which you mentioned is one of the great, I guess, steals of society.
It's gangster.
It's very gangster. It's very gangster. I couldn't think of a better word than gangster. It was thuggish.
That was total thug world, man.
It was thuggish, man. But yeah, you're right. You're right, man. Like this thing is not a coincidence. This was set up to be this way, and whomever crafted that was a thug.
Yeah. Well, to me, and it's one of those things that, if you think about the psychology of it, there's a quote that says if you tell a man he's lesser than, and he begins to believe it, you will not have to force him to go through the back door. His very nature will cause him to go to the back door to find a way in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there was a systematic process that was used to get people in a slave-like mentality. And what I often say that I don't think a lot of people think about, and this is, I'd like your take on it, but I don't know that a lot of people think about it. Slavery went on for 400 years.
Sure.
That means for 400 years, Europeans, mostly the Dutch who had the boats, would come. That's why they settled in South Africa. Would come over, and they would extract Africans and take them and transport them to the Caribbean, Jamaica, which was the launch point for all the different points of slavery, all through Central and South America. Everywhere you see the African diaspora, that was all slavery trade. So my question is, how do you go to Africa amidst millions of African warriors and just take boatloads of people off that island for 400 years?
That is a good question. I would imagine the answer is based on some sort of a lie. If you make an empty promise to someone, that's the only way I can see something like that
So
happening.
they told them it was the land of
It was
opportunity.
the land.
They need to leave Shangri-La, Africa, and
It's
come
the land of
to their
opportunities, the land of milk and
disease-ridden.
honey. Exactly.
But they
And-
were going in chains and shackles, man.
Yeah,
They weren't
yeah.
coming over like
Yeah.
boat people today. They
Yeah.
weren't coming over like how they're hustling slaves now.
Yeah.
These were chained people that were occupying bottom hulls that were being thrown overboard when they died in transit. So what I'm saying is that there had to be some Africans in Africa that were
Mhm.
selling the hell out of some
Mhm.
slaves and
Mhm.
making a lot of money. But nobody talks about that.
No, you're right. You're right. That does make sense. You tend to trust people that are your brother. So if your brother tells you to do something, as opposed to someone that you don't know, you'll be more inclined to follow or do what your brother asks of you. So that is a good question, Oscar. I would say when you put it like that, of course, it has to be. No one will willingly just hop in chains and go sail across the sea
right.
to an unknown land.
That's
So
right.
yes, there is some deception somewhere down the line that I would imagine would have gotten them to that point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
no, man. I want to share when we come back. Perhaps one of the most poignant conversations I had with the great Mai Haley.
Okay.
We all have heard of Roots with
Absolutely.
Kunta Kinte.
Yes.
I had a conversation with Mai Haley. She came here several times, and we became friends. I want to share with the audience a little bit about her insights when she was helping to write the book Roots.
Okay.
We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Natural Nation Network. When we come back, we're going to continue to talk about the state of our nation. We're here live at Midtown Bar and Grill. Back in just a moment.
Aren't you tired of not getting what you want in bed?
Are you ready to spice things up behind those closed doors?
Woo! We're here for you every hump day at 7 p.m.
This is Sex on the Edge with Jen and Hen. I'm Jennifer Reeves.
And I'm Hendrik Scott, and we are professional licensed sex therapists.
So remember to watch us Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Edge Radio TV, just in time for sexy time.
When people stop talking to each other, society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
And we are back. This is the Natural Nation Network. I am your host, Oscar Hines, here with Mill. We have been mixing it up, Mill.
Absolutely.
We've been talking a little bit about some of sort of the evolution of how things have gone with the economies, with policies.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to go back and just anecdotally share for just a moment. Dr. Mai Haley.
Yeah.
Most people don't know this, but Alex Haley, the writer of Roots, he had a wife.
Okay.
And he married her during his obligation or commitment to write the book Roots. Mm-hmm. Well, so she was a writer. She was a student. Mm-hmm. He recruited her. She had gotten her master's. She was a very smart lady. And she helped him write the vast majority of that book. So, for example, she did some research when she went to Ghana and different places. But you remember in the Kunta Kinte, when he was born, his father holds him up, and it's like James Earl Jones's voice, and he goes, "Behold, the only thing greater than yourself." And they use that in The Lion King. So if y'all think that's familiar, that's from Kunta Kinte, man. So going back, she talked about the nuances of how the African tradition was such that your name was the most sacred thing, and that you were respected by your tribe.
Wow.
And so you would say your father's name and his father's name and so on, and they would have those traditions. Now, we look at that and we wonder how you go from these powerful warriors to a situation where you're being captive on a boat by 30 or 40 crew members. Now, you can say, okay, they had guns. They did. But you also know what those guns do, and you can ambush them. You can Shanghai
strength
them.
in numbers. Yeah.
You can overwhelm them. I always wondered what would have happened if, instead of the African tribes being divided on the shorelines of Africa, what would have happened if they said, we have natural resources that we can trade with these foreigners, and they will give us things of value, and we will give them things of value. Imagine how that would have changed the trajectory of the global economies when people of melanated skin are sitting on top of the largest reserves of natural resources on the planet. And that if you look in the biblical context, they were known as Hebrews. And people don't realize that. So when you started hearing about the chosen people, that's why some of the African American sectors and segments, they refer to themselves as Hebrews.
Yeah, gotcha.
But the money, if you follow the money, it was in the slave trade. And when you look at how all over the world the slave trade enriched certain barons and so on, that's where it all came from.
Wow, getting a history lesson here, Oscar.
Sorry, I digress, man.
I'm all ears. And you raise an interesting point. I think it would have changed the diaspora of the economy, wealth, if those people then would have used those resources as a trade, or saw the influence and the power of those resources. Then you raise a interesting point there. It's definitely something I would have to think on and kind of just reassess, I guess. But I think it is power in those resources. I think other countries have used those natural resources to the best of their ability, and I think it would have changed the overall.
Well,
global,
even the monetary system, because if you look at people celebrate Christopher Columbus and all of these guys and Montezuma and all of these Spanish conquistadors that came to the southern regions of South and Central America. These guys basically were also extracting natural resources from South America, Brazil. I mean, it was essentially let's go to all the fertile places in the
So
world.
they weren't just explorers, just exploring.
Absolutely
Oh,
not.
okay.
It was all about the money.
I thought it was I thought it was an expedition to find out what was out there.
What was out? What natural resources?
What was
could we
out
bring
there?
back?
Okay.
You
I
know,
got you.
and it started with some of the basics, man.
Mhm.
You know that at one point salt was traded pound for pound with gold.
Well, salt had a greater value back then, I would
Yeah.
imagine, with the preservation of certain foods and things of that nature. So yeah, I would imagine when you put it like that, yeah. It's very valuable.
Yeah.
People need to eat. People need to eat to live. So if you could preserve it, yeah.
Yeah, you cure that meat,
Hey,
salt it up,
there
it
you
doesn't
go.
spoil.
There
I
you
mean,
go. There
you
you
know,
go.
so that was the modern day refrigerator back then.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
if you think about all of these different explorers,
Sure.
they were traveling the world, and they were gaining strongholds. They were gaining colonies, and the whole objective was that allowed them to amass greater and greater wealth, which allowed them to buy more weapons and more military wherewithal. And so, you know, Spain at one point was a dominant world power. France was a dominant world power. England was a dominant world power. You know, and all of that happened, and it was based on the commerce of slavery, as well as the cultivation of natural resources that were being essentially extracted from those lands.
Now, not to V-line from what you're talking about here, but you raising this up made me think about something that's maybe a little bit more current in our history. And when you say that, when you speak of natural resources in the game that was played there, I think about drugs. And, you know, just if you can just expound on that. Like, I know the United States were in a contra negotiation deal.
Have you ever heard
of sorts
in the history books? Have you ever heard of the Opium Wars?
The Opium Wars? No, I'm not familiar.
Okay.
No.
So it was very, very popular. To conquer the great nation of India
Sure.
and China, the Brits had to come up with a way to seduce large numbers of people.
Okay.
So they introduced opium into the communities.
Wow.
And these guys, for a lack of a better, to use a current analogy, all these Chinese became crackheads. and they started, they took their gunpowder, which is how they started making guns. And because the Chinese invented gunpowder. I hope you guys know this, right? And so that was from an old playbook. Wow. Now let's since you're talking about more current history, let's fast forward to the 1960s.
Okay.
In Vietnam. Pol Pot. Pol Pot killed and slaughtered more Cambodians than anybody else, just as bad as Hitler. Millions of people died under Pol Pot, which was basically funded by this government, our government.
Wow.
And poppy seeds were abundant, and they were importing a lot of drugs into this country, and it was coming all through the carriers. I mean, it's documented. There is documented proof of this. And so it weakened the community in the 60s.
Wow.
Okay, fast forward 20 more years. Now you're dealing with a pandemic in the inner city. And that pandemic was based on crack cocaine, which powdered cocaine was more insidious. That was considered the rich man's drug.
The rich man's drug.
So you got 5 months probation if you had, you know, your grams of cocaine. But you get a little rock of crack, you going away.
You got the book.
And guess what?
Yeah.
Then we had the Democratic administration of Bill Clinton. 3 strikes and you're out.
Yeah, I recall that.
The 3 strikes, man, was brutal because you're talking about people getting life sentences for marijuana. The same thing that the corporations are getting ready to make tons and tons of money. They're already making money on the cannabis industry. And guess what? They always knew that cannabis was not detrimental, but they had to vilify it until they could control it as a substance and monetize it.
Exactly. Wow.
So then you've got 675,000 men, black men, people of color, imprisoned during the Clinton administration while he's playing saxophone on Arsenio Hall.
I think that was previous to the administration.
Yeah, but that's how he campaigned.
I get it.
The man of the people.
Appeal to black folk.
And at the end of the day, it was all about filling all those brand new prisons that they just finished building, and the fact that they were privatizing the prisons.
Privatizing prisons, absolutely. You're right. You're 100% right. Like, hey, I think, and this is my personal opinion, like, that has to come to a stop, like the privatizing of prisons, because it becomes a business, and in order for a business to grow, you're going to need consumers, and unfortunately the consumers for those businesses are usually from black and brown areas, and of course, in order to filter those folks into the business, which is the prison, the big house, you have to place laws that make it a little more easier for them to not only be placed in those houses, but for an extended period of time, so you can continue to make money. So that
2.5 million, close to 3 million people of color are locked up right now.
Absolutely. I
That's
think we are
in
the world. Exactly. I think we are amongst the leaders in the world when it comes to prison population. And then that growth over the past 30 years or so, maybe even 40 years, is just exponential compared to the rest of the world. And yes, privatizing of prisons have absolutely everything to do with that.
Yeah. And it's a sad and brutal reality that both sides are involved in that process.
It is.
And that's why I think the conversation they had regarding erase race and the whole institutional racism, I think people have to examine how racism works on both sides of the aisle, because it exists on both sides of the aisle. And that's what the previous speaker was talking about. And I think, people have to come to a realization that it's somebody's worldview that you have to look at if you're choosing a leader, and not necessarily just say, oh, this guy belongs to this party or this guy belongs to that party.
Sure.
Because as we opened our conversation today, we were talking about how there was this radical perception that it's all happy days right now. And I don't think that people of color fall asleep at the wheel during this administration, because it can be equally devastating, because people fell asleep at the wheel. They thought they were great after Clinton got in office.
Exactly.
And guess what?
Yeah. The residuals.
Almost 700,000 black men went to jail.
Absolutely.
While everybody else was chilling, thinking life was great.
Absolutely.
So folks, don't fall asleep at the wheel. That's the moral of this story. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue and wrap our conversation here on the Natural Nation Network. We're talking about the state of the nation. We'll be back in just a moment.
Don't push me because I'm close to the edge.
I'm trying not to lose my head.
Hey, this is the Talk About Unity show where I bring the talk.
And I bring the unity.
And together we talk about unity. Unity is what matters. Come on. And right now in our country, that's what we've got to do. So we do that here at Talk About Unity on the Edge Radio Network. Be with us every week.
It's going to be awesome. It always is. And I tell you what, the more we seek first to understand, then be understood, we make progress.
And we like to do that. And that's why everybody's on the brink. We love what we do at Edge Radio, because everybody's on the edge. We bring them back from the edge and we bring the unity. So we're just glad to Edge Radio Network every Tuesday morning, 10 a.m. Talk about unity, because here at Edge Radio Network, truth still matters.
And we are back. This is the Natural Nation Network here on Edge Radio TV. Be sure to follow us on Edge Radio TV, edgeradiotv.com. Invite friends, invite family, invite yourselves to think differently about your worldview. Give yourself an opportunity to expand that which you are seeing every day, hearing every day, and remembering that truth still matters. So we are joined by Mill. We have an opportunity to mix it up, man. This has been a great conversation.
Absolutely.
So based on kind of the overview of what we were just discussing, this whole idea that there's been this systematic approach to poisoning communities of color, vilifying them, imprisoning them, and preventing them from really gaining the same economic footing.
Absolutely.
Now the veil is being pulled off of all of this. We now have a black vice president, Madam Vice President, that is in the office.
First ever.
First ever. That's a major deal. We have a president who is appointing a cabinet with a wide degree of diversity.
Lots of diversity. Absolutely.
So what is the future? What is the foreboding of the future now based on your perception?
Based on my perception. Okay. You know, I think especially in the black community, but in all communities of color and all diverse communities where diversity is included, I think we learned the value of the vote this election. If you look at the numbers, President Trump received, what was it, about 74 million, if I'm not mistaken, votes, and still lost by the largest amount in history.
Yes.
That 74 million was way more than either he or Hillary Clinton
than
before,
anyone
or anyone
history.
in the history.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, you have to understand as a people that we are in control. We are at power. I believe power is not finite. It's something that's infinite, you know? So what I mean by that is the people have the power to write any law, to put any politician in office, and to have your community, your area, your jurisdiction reflect your beliefs and the things that you think that are important for your area. Once we start to understand that, I think we then start to control and change the narrative, because ultimately I think over time we believe that the people in power have all the control.
Right.
I believe different.
You think the people have
I think the people
control.
have the control.
Well, you know, there is truth to what you're saying. The people do have a degree of control. I think they have to be discerning enough to ask the questions.
Absolutely.
And then they also have to be disciplined enough to hold accountability.
And that's the main thing.
Because here's the inherent problem I have with the entire political system. I think it's based on, if you could step away from the constructs of what they tell you makes sense. So you got somebody who can be elected and be an incumbent and get reelected indefinitely. There are no term limits.
I don't like
and
that.
you've got people who started in politics with no money and suddenly they're multimillionaires when they only get $100,000 a year.
It doesn't
What
make
did they
sense.
just be? Were they really prudent savers
That's
that
not
whole
adding
time?
up.
So those are the questions that people have to ask. And then, and not only term limits, but also what are the policies that are really being administrated?
Absolutely.
Because you have something in politics they call pork. Every time you got a bill that somebody wants to pass, they attach pork to it. So now they're giving their Uncle Benny in Arizona, who owns an airport, some tax breaks on his deal. Or over here in New York City, the factory union workers are going to get a certain amount of a raise because of that.
Yeah.
It's all predicated on the gimme and the gotchas.
Absolutely.
And it's all being funded and financed on the backs of the American people.
Absolutely.
And then people are led to believe that they have some kind of political voice, when in reality we're dealing with this antiquated system based on the electoral vote, which was when farmers were ruling the freaking land, for crying out loud. Now we got investment bankers that are ruling the land. But somehow that landscape hasn't changed. So we're electing presidents predicated on the population of Rhode Island versus California. I mean, come on.
Yeah. You know, I remember years ago, our representative, Sheila Jackson Lee, was just yelling about redistricting. I was like, what was she talking about? I was in school at the time. I was like, what is she talking about? And I think later in life, I'm starting to understand that and the importance of that. You know, I believe the popular vote says something. But even though it may be against, you know, some who I support from time to time, I do believe that the Electoral College does have importance, because I think this, like, if you look at the popular vote, you ever look at the map especially during the general election, the edges of the country
are blue,
the middle
red,
and Florida, and Texas, it's always red, right? So that to me says that people in certain areas of the country can't control everything all the time. I think it should be yin and yang. I think it should be a balance. I think those people in the middle of the country should have a voice as well to what they believe, even though sometimes I may not quote unquote agree with that. I believe that's what the democracy and the intent of the Electoral College was. Because if you look at the fact that someone like Donald Trump is president, someone like Kanye West could hop in there and get a couple million votes in a given year. Oprah could probably run in a couple years.
It's a popularity contest.
It's a popularity contest. So, and I imagine most of those people will probably have the same ideals and the same vision of what the country should be. So ultimately, I don't think we should do away with the Electoral College, but I do think that we should clean it up and make sure, as you said, 4 votes here in Rhode Island or wherever, some small
if you're in Wyoming, and you are able to control a certain amount of the electoral college, you know, Iowa determines the caucus and who gets elected. I mean, so I think the whole damn thing needs an overhaul. I personally think the electoral college is a crock of crap. I'm sorry. I just can't accept that you can give equal votes. I think popular votes should govern, but I also think that the two-party system is inherently flawed, and that in many respects is heads of the same snake. So, I mean, it may not be something we completely agree on, and some folks might, again, disagree, but guys, you know, that's what makes this amazing experiment we call the American system what it is. We get a chance to have diverse opinions.
Absolutely.
We get a chance to have worldviews, but we also get a chance to expose truth.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I treasure. So, man, listen, Mel, I want to thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation.
Pleasure being here.
And for those who want to connect to the Edge Radio Network, be sure to get to Edge Radio TV. Those of you who have topics and subjects and interesting books and ideas and concepts, you know what? We want to hear from them too. We want to get an opportunity to have individuals like you with opinions, maybe different opinions, and we can mix it up here on the Edge Radio Network. So be sure to inbox us at Edge Radio TV. Thank you for joining us, Mill. Thank you for having this conversation with me. This was insightful. And folks, be sure to stay connected here on the Edge Radio Network throughout all of our social media. We'll be back with several amazing shows this week. We want you to tune in, a couple of new ones. Just stay tuned and we'll keep you posted. Have a fabulous day and stay connected to your inner spirit so that you can act with your inner warrior. Have a fabulous, fabulous day.